Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Timothy Regal. Today we're going to talk about Freemasonry. For those of you who may not know, I myself am a Freemason. I'm currently Worshipful Master of my Masonic Lodge here in Pennsylvania. And to discuss Freemasonry, what it is, what it isn't, what they do in those aprons behind closed doors, I have with me today Brother Robert D. Brink. Brother Rob is Right Worshipful Senior Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. He's a past District Deputy Grand Master and a past Master of my lodge. He's a member of the Shriners as well as a 32nd Degree Scottish Rite Mason and will soon be awarded the 33rd degree, which is the highest level of Freemasonry. So Brother Rob, thanks for joining me today.
Tim, thanks. Great to be here.
Appreciate it. Glad to have you. So first, let's just talk, what is Freemasonry? We hear a lot about it. What is it?
Okay, so what is Freemasonry is kind of a tough question because, there are scholars that have been studying this for a long time. But I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is it's a very old fraternity, the oldest fraternity in the world. It's a large fraternity. There are 80-some thousand members in the state of Pennsylvania alone, not counting the rest of the world. But it's a fraternity at its lowest level. It's a bunch of men who get together and do things, for fun and for charitable purposes and for personal fulfillment, personal enlightenment.
So how did you get involved with Masonry?
So I was in my late 20s, maybe 30 till I actually joined the lodge. And I was married. I had two young daughters. I had a job and I worked real hard all the time. And I really didn't have a good circle of friends, male friends, outside of my work. And I had read some books on the fraternity. Born in Blood was one of the books that I read that kind of got my attention. And I saw my neighbor wearing a Scottish Rite two-headed eagle ring, and I asked him about it. And one thing led to another, and I joined Saucon Lodge in Coopersburg, Pennsylvania.
So, what were your thoughts about it before getting involved with it? Like, did you know much about it at all, or had you just kind of heard what you see in movies and TV, or, because that's kind of how mine was as well. I didn't know a ton about it. I know some family and extended family and things that were Masons, and there were positive and negative connotations with it. But kind of the same thing. I was new to the area, new to the Coopersburg area, and wanted to be a part of the community and a men's group, and I just kind of reached out cold. I didn't even know anybody. So what were you kind of your perception of it going into it?
So I to be honest, I wasn't real sure what I was getting myself into. I knew there were Masons in my family from a very long time ago, before my family even came here from Europe in the 1600s. And they had been Masons throughout that time. But in the current generation, there was only one other Mason in my family that I was aware of, and he's an uncle who doesn't even live around here. Mm-hmm. So I had very little connection to the fraternity. I had little idea what I was getting into other than, the sensational things you see on TV and, what little bit someone would tell you because, it's just not a subject that gets talked about, in the open that much. So I was hoping that it would be the fraternity that it has turned out to be for me. Mm-hmm. It has actually worked out swimmingly well, considering I didn't really know what I was getting into.
Right. Where does a lot of that, we hear a lot about this sort of stuff, Freemasonry is behind, the building of Washington, D.C., and you hear a lot about, George Washington, Ben Franklin, all these guys that were Freemasons, and there's all this stuff that they secretly built the United States and all of that. So where did Freemasonry come from? Where did it start? And how did it evolve into what it is, especially here in the United States today?
All right, so even though I'm the Senior Grand Warden in the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, that question is a little above my pay grade. There have been scholars studying this for a very long time. And to my knowledge, there are two basic schools of thought and or combinations of the two. One being that Freemasonry literally came from Masonic orders, Masonic guilds that built temples, in ancient Europe and in the Middle East. And the other is that they were an offshoot eventually of the Knights Templar that were the guardians of Jerusalem and the bankers, the early bankers in the world. Mm-hmm. To be honest, I don't know what the origin was. I do know what it is today, and that is the fraternity that I described.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of came out of the, I don't want to say the term came out of the shadows because that has kind of negative connotations, but it kind of came to public knowledge in like the early 1700s in England, correct?
Yeah. 1717, the Grand Lodge of England was established as a formal, modern-day Masonic organization.
Right. And so it became where the term Freemasonry comes from, free and accepted Masons, is where they're not literal stonemasons, correct?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, accepted into this symbolic guild of sorts.
Yeah, so it's a lot of symbolic to where they're not real Masons, but they're being accepted into this group and going through. That's where we get our terms of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. The 3 degrees of masonry were the same 3 degrees you went through in the stone masons guilds.
Yeah, that's correct.
Almost apprenticeships, kind of, and licensing. I guess they're the medieval version of getting a contractor's license, kind of.
Basically, yeah, you're going through a training process, and so obviously, knowing all those things about modern Freemasonry, there must be some sort of connection to the Masonic guilds, right?
Right. So, and then it comes to the United States, along with a lot of the colonial things, that came from England and France, and is, Freemasonry is very, very popular there. And so a lot of the early leaders were Masons. We mentioned George Washington, Ben Franklin, Paul Revere, all different ones like that were all Masons and had their lodges in colonial America, and it just kind of grew. I know you've talked about and done studies on the different types of Freemasonry, where it was kind of in the early years in colonial America, it was kind of in small little taverns or little lodges, and then it kind of went big into the big Masonic cathedrals and temples, and now it's kind of more of a community type of thing.
Yeah, it has definitely evolved over time. It's clear that it came from England predominantly because England pretty much was the primary settler of the United States originally, and they had a strong Masonic presence there. And those guys when they all showed up here in what became the United States, they had a common bond. That bond being Freemasonry, and so since they had this common bond and they were the guys who were developing this country, other men were drawn to it because these are the guys that are actually getting things done. So it was pretty clear how that happened. And then, like you say, over time, it grew dramatically, a huge expansion in the 1900s after World War I and after World War II. And Freemasonry got very, very big. And the Masons started to build cathedrals, and you'll see some of those around. You'll see Masonic cathedrals and Masonic and Scottish Rite cathedrals that were pretty much an offshoot of that huge expansion that occurred during that time after those two world wars. These days, like most social organizations, the fraternity has seen a decrease in membership, partly because of that huge amount that came in. They're dying eventually, and so here we are today with a little less cathedral oriented, a little more sort of town oriented.
Right. So you brought up like Scottish Rite, and there's different appendages to Freemasonry. You see the local lodge, like we're a part of here in Pennsylvania. You see the big grand lodges, and you see the huge thing with the dukes and everything in England, and then you see the smaller stuff here. You see the Shriners driving little cars and parades. You see the guys with the 32nd degree and the double-headed phoenix rings. And so what are all those different branches of Freemasonry? How are they all together, and what separates them?
So this is a common question. It's probably the most common question that I answer, and it is that at the basic level, all of those guys are Freemasons. They've all joined what we call a blue lodge, which is like our lodge here in Coopersburg. Some lodges are quite a bit bigger, some are smaller, but our lodge has about 270 members, and it's a town lodge. In other words, we're part of this community. So these guys are all members of a lodge, and then they decide they want to do like a special interest kind of thing. For example, every Shriner is a Mason, and those guys tend to have a charitable bend, and their charity is the Shriners Hospitals. So they put their effort into fundraising for the Shriners Hospitals. So when you see the clowns driving around in the little cars, they're having a heck of a time. They're really enjoying themselves, and they're also making money for the Shriners Hospitals, and that is their primary goal. So it's like that. The Scottish Rite, it's heavily education oriented. If you want to learn more about Freemasonry and about various moral and ethical lessons in life, the Scottish Rite is a great place to learn those things. But you start by being a Blue Lodge Mason, just a basic Freemason.
Great. Yeah. And then once you become that and you go through those 3 degrees, then you can join all those other different bodies.
That's correct. The Blue Lodge
bodies.
is the foundation, and then
Right.
from there you go up the pyramid.
Right. I wanted to talk about one thing too, is explaining the different roles in the lodge, and then as well as your role in the Grand Lodge. Our lodge, Saucon Lodge, is in Pennsylvania. It's its own individual Blue Lodge, a local community lodge, but it's part of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, which is the governing body of all the Masonic lodges in Pennsylvania. And so within the Blue Lodge, I mentioned in our open that I'm the current Worshipful Master of our lodge. So, I mean, obviously I know what that is, but you're more well-versed in this. Explain who the Worshipful Master is, what he does, and what his duties are in the lodge.
All right, so the smallest lodge organization is a Blue Lodge, a lodge like ours. And the Worshipful Master is basically the president of the club. Mm-hmm. His job is, he has responsibility for the lodge during his 1-year term. And maybe he'll go on for a second year or maybe not, but he has a 1-year term. And he's literally the president of the organization. We use this sort of archaic term, Worshipful Master, which means a revered person. He's the master, and he's revered for what he does for the lodge. He's respected. But yeah, he's the guy who runs the lodge for that year. And the positions leading up to that are basically, his vice presidents. If he were the president, they're the vice presidents, and they help him achieve his goals during that year.
One thing people hear, at least in my experience, when I tell them, I'm Worshipful Master of my lodge, well, they hear worshipful, then it gets those religious connotations, and that's where some of that comes in. But that original term doesn't just mean worshiping like worshiping God. It can mean worthy of respect, or kind of the same as you call a judge your honor, or
exactly.
The mayor is the honorable so-and-so.
It's very much like that. The
yeah.
Worshipful is basically a term of respect.
So then, like we mentioned, the Blue Lodge makes up, and I'm the Worshipful Master of our Blue Lodge, but those are all a part of the Grand Lodge, and there's multiple Grand Lodges all over the world. Ours is Pennsylvania. So you're the Senior Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Explain what your role is and how kind of the Grand Lodge works in comparison to the local Blue Lodges.
So starting from the top, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania was organized in 1731 in Philadelphia, and there were very famous characters involved in that. Ben Franklin was involved. In fact, Ben Franklin went on to become a Grand Master of Masons in Pennsylvania twice. That is the top level organization, and underneath the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania are about 360 Blue Lodges everywhere in Pennsylvania. And those Blue Lodges are organized into districts and regions. So a district might have between 5 and 10 lodges, and then a region might have, 10 districts or something like that. We have 50 districts in Pennsylvania, so there are 50 district deputy Grand Masters. Their job is to run that district on behalf of the Grand Master, and to try to organize that district to run according to the way the Grand Master wants to see them run that year, and according to the general rules of Freemasonry anyway. My function is at the Grand Lodge level now. I was a district deputy Grand Master for 8 years, and then I got selected to be the junior Grand Warden, and then I became the senior Grand Warden. Those are 2-year terms, and then I have one more term, which will be the deputy Grand Master, and then in the years 2025 and 2026, I'll be the Grand Master of Masons in Pennsylvania. The Grand Master is very similar to the Master of a Lodge. His job is to run the entire fraternity in Pennsylvania. A small aside here is that there is no higher level of Freemasonry than the states in the United States. In other words, there's no federal Masonic lodge. It's all just state by state. So in Pennsylvania, or in the United States, there are 50 Grand Lodges, one per state, basically. I believe every state has one. I'm not sure of that. But there's no overarching Masonic body. So in Pennsylvania, the Grand Master is the CEO, the chairman of the board, the main guy, and his term lasts for 2 years, and then the next one comes in.
Great. So we've talked quite a bit about what Freemasonry is and how it's structured and how it works. What do Freemasons do? Like, what are we doing in the lodge? We have these meetings, they're behind closed doors, there's all these secret oaths and handshakes. What do they do? What do we do?
Okay, so a Masonic lodge is not a whole lot different in its basic function to like a 4-H club. I mean, you have leaders and you have people that are involved and you have projects that you do and things like that. Ours takes it a little farther in that, we have fraternal vows that we take. We have fraternal obligations to help each other and to help the families of our brothers, and to help our communities and to do charity in general. But so there is definitely charity. We do fundraisers. You'll see Masons selling stuff at the fair and doing that kind of thing, and they're taking that money and they're using it for good purposes. And to be honest, they're using some of it just to run the fraternity, to
Right.
to pay their light bills and things like that. But inside of a meeting, we have minutes. We have people that contribute things. We have an education section typically, and there's usually just some fun. I mean, the guys are hanging out, and sometimes there's some joking around that goes on, and it's just fun to be hanging out with these brothers that you've made.
Right.
And another really cool thing about Masonic lodges is that they bring people from all walks of life. In our lodge, we have guys who, are cashiers at the local market. We have guys that are CEOs. We have guys that are doctors, dentists, lawyers. We have a guy on the other side of the mic here that's a pastor and also a funeral director. We have every kind of person, and that is really neat because you don't get that just anywhere.
Right.
It's rare to be in a room full of such a diverse crowd of different occupations and different walks of life. And that's really mind expanding. It's really good for you. I believe it's been good for me to be exposed to all those different viewpoints. Okay.
Yeah, it really is a melting pot of types of men, ages of men, different backgrounds and everything. And they all kind of come together for a common purpose.
Absolutely right. In fact, there's about almost 20 years difference between me and Tim. And, Tim and I might not hang out if it wasn't for the lodge.
Right.
And the fact is we do hang out now because of the lodge.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing because, we come from basically two different generations and we are friends and we enjoy each other's company and that's a good thing.
Right.
We have no professional ties whatsoever. It's all just a fraternal bond. And that's a really good thing. This might be a good time to mention one of the things that keeps Freemasonry working so well, I believe, is that we don't allow political discussions in our lodges and we don't allow religious discussions. And the reason for that is those are two really inflammatory subjects. It's not that we have anything against politics and it's not that we have anything against religion. We just encourage our members to have those discussions somewhere else.
Right.
For the harmony and good order of the lodge.
Right. And we're there to better ourselves as men. One of the mottos of Freemasonry is to take good men and make them better. Some of that we do simply by just what we just talked about. Men of different backgrounds coming together, you can learn from each other. You have instant network of friends. Especially for me, that was great for me moving into the area. I didn't really know that many people. So all of a sudden I have all these people that I can know, that I can go to, that can give me advice, that can help me in tough times, that I can help them in tough times. Just this instant network of friends and brothers that you automatically have as soon as you join.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's been really good for me in the 23 or 4 years I've been a member.
You mentioned, we don't discuss religion in the lodge, but the lodge, and that's something that I think one of the people outside of Freemasonry, one of their biggest criticisms of it or suspicions of it is that it is a religion or it is a cult, or some people go as far as to say it's satanic. I don't believe any of that. Can you explain what's the difference here? What people think Freemasonry is a religion. Why is it not a religion? But there are religious parts of that. So can you kind of, expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a common misconception. The basic principle in relation to religion in Freemasonry is that you are expected to have the religious beliefs that you have. You're expected to keep them to yourself in the lodge because there are other people in the lodge who may not have the same religious beliefs you have. We do have prayers in the lodge, not unlike, sometimes you go to a township meeting and they open the meeting with a prayer. We open our meeting with a prayer. We say a pledge to the flag and we have a prayer related to the flag ceremony. But there's really no religion per se. It's more just a reverence. It's a reverence for God, whatever God you believe in, and it's just a general respect for your fellow citizens, that kind of thing. But there's certainly no religion per se, because you're expected to worship as you see fit.
So it's a belief in God, but you don't have to follow a certain religion. For
That's
example,
exactly right.
a Christian can be a Mason, a Catholic can be a Mason, a Jewish person can be a Mason, Muslim, anybody that, but you do have to believe in God, correct?
Yeah, you have to believe in God, and you have to believe in one God.
Right.
So you could, for example, I don't know that much about these religions, but Hindus or Buddhists, if they believe in one God, that's acceptable. If they are polytheists, that's not acceptable to Freemasonry. And we don't accept atheists. You have to believe in a God.
But the lodge itself isn't worshiping a God.
No, in fact, there's really no worship at all
Right.
in a lodge. Although the people who have visited a Blue Lodge will notice that there is an altar in the middle of the lodge, and so you may think that maybe, okay, there's an altar, this must be a religion. Well, in fact, it's not. The altar is a place where we put out in our case, the Holy Bible. It could just as well be a Quran, or it could be the Torah. It could be another religious book, as long as it's the one that lodge, the majority in that lodge, believes is their holy book. But it's more of a symbol. It's not a place where we actually worship. It is a place where we take our Masonic oaths. When you join a fraternity, any fraternity, even those of you who joined a fraternity in college, you take an oath, and your oaths, have various parts in them, but the altar is the place where we take those oaths. Right. There's no worship to it. It's more just you're making an oath to the fraternity when you do that.
And a lot of people have issues with taking an oath. Some people are like, well, the Bible says you shouldn't take an oath before man, and all these other things. And a lot of people have problems with that the Masonic oaths are secret. They're not written down anywhere. You can't. No Mason. In fact, part of the oath is that you don't tell anyone what the oath is.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have kind of an apprehension about that. Well, I don't know what this is going to say. What am I agreeing to if I'm taking this oath? So why is there the secrecy to that? Why is there the secret oaths, the secret handshakes, all that sort of secret society stuff that you hear so much about?
Well, that's a good question in terms of the fact that we don't tell people what's in the oath. To call it a secret society is a stretch, because we have the internet these days, and pretty much if you're any good at using Google, you can probably find just about everything that goes on inside of a Masonic lodge. And unless you're actually a member of the fraternity, you're really not going to care, because these oaths are you making a commitment is what they are. And it's not that much different than any other oath you may take. And why is it secret? I don't know. I guess it always has been, and I'm not sure there's certainly nothing nefarious about it. Tim and I talked earlier that when I first joined the lodge in my town, my mother and my grandmother were, they feared for my soul.
Yeah.
And I told my mother, look, I don't really know what I'm getting into here, but I'd like to give it a try, and I promise you that if I see anything nefarious going on, I will exit stage left. And as I got more involved, I realized that there's nothing nefarious going on here. This is a bunch of good guys doing good things, and to this day, 20-some years later, the vast majority of my friends are Masons. These are good people, and my mother and my grandmother eventually, after 5 or 10 years, started to believe me that there really is nothing bad going on here. In fact, they started to see the good things that we do for our members and their widows and their families and the community. And they are very calm now about me being a Mason, and especially about me being a Grand Officer in the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Right. Time has proven to them that, no matter what you hear about these things, the conjecture and all that, it's just people who don't understand and don't know making these conjectures that, they really have no basis.
Yeah, and you're at the highest levels of Freemasonry, as we mentioned in your intro. I mean, you're about to get to 33rd degree here in a year or so. There isn't any higher than that. So it's not like I'm just a lowly master mason in a local lodge in Coopersburg. I don't know the real secret stuff. They keep that in England somewhere, and you don't find out about that.
A good conspiracy theorist would claim that I don't either. There's a shadow organization, and it, you're just a figurehead, and Well, if you want to find a conspiracy, I suppose you can.
Yeah.
You can make one up for sure. I mean, I'd be happy to sit and make up conspiracies. That's kind of
Right.
fun. But all I can say is that my experience has been overwhelmingly positive, and I see no validity to the conspiracy theories I've heard. In fact, I find them pretty entertaining.
Yeah. And you see that all the time. I mean, the Freemasons have been portrayed in, like the National Treasure movies and in all these movies of where they're, secret things, and there's all these secret symbols hidden in the street layout of Washington, D.C., and there's all these other things. And we have become a target for that because it's just anything that doesn't fit, they throw it on the Masons. You kind of see that how many things have come out of the Knights Templar. The Da Vinci Code, where they're talking about the Holy Grail was all the Knights Templar. All the Rothschilds and all the banking money came out of the Knights Templar. And so I think when there's anything that is kind of has a little bit of secrecy or mystery to it, it becomes the target point for all those conspiracy theories.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I can't add much to it. I mean, people can make up wild things, and like you say, if it doesn't fit, let's claim it was the Masons.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that Freemasonry does have is there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of allegory. You see these symbols. You see the square and the compass and the letter G, the plumb, the level, the square. What do all those symbols mean, and what's their involvement in Masonry?
So what I said early in this interview that one of the components of Freemasonry is education. And most of these symbols, I'd say probably all of these symbols, have some meaning, some valuable meaning. You'll see a plumb, a level, and a square. A plumb, admonishes you to walk upright in your several stations in life. Be a good, upstanding person is what it's trying to tell you. A square your actions. In other words, do well by others, expect them to do well by you. So they all have meaning. The G, the obvious interpretation would be God, but another interpretation would be geometry, because you can imagine that the stonemason guilds they understood their geometry pretty well.
Right.
So they all have meaning. There are lots and lots of symbols in Freemasonry, but they're mostly used for education and allegorical lesson kind of reasons.
Right. So they're kind of used as they might have come from all these stonemason craft guilds. And they had a geometric architectural purpose, and we've just kind of used that as Freemasons now instead of operative Masons like we talked about earlier, to where they're used to apply that to your life.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you mentioned a little bit ago about symbolism, about how you see these things hidden all over the place. Well, that's actually true. There are Masonic symbols all over the place, and if you just open your eyes, they're not really hidden. They're right there in plain sight. You just walk right past them and don't even realize it. In just about any small town in the United States, there's probably a lodge. And if you walk down the main street and keep your eyes open, you might see one door that goes up a staircase to the second or third floor of a building, and right above that door is a square and compass with a G in it. That's where the Masonic Lodge meets. In the days before our generations, the lodges were pretty quiet. They were nondescript and quiet, and they didn't advertise and anything like that. And those lodges are quite old. Typically, they could be 100-200 years old, and they're still relatively hidden from sight. But yet they're in plain view. You can see that square and compass sitting there, and that's where the lodge meets.
Right. And it's not one of the common things that I've heard said about Freemasonry is that it's not a secret society. It's a society with secrets.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And we've talked about kind of why there's some of those secrets. I mean, I think some of that goes back to these origin stories that we've talked about. A lot of these craft masons in the medieval times were traveling from England to Germany to France, and they had to. That was their license to do work, and you just didn't want to give that away. It was giving your trade secrets, literally.
Yep.
So they would develop these handshakes, these symbols, these ways to identify each other, so that you knew somebody was legit and had the credentials to do it, and B, that you weren't just giving away all your trade secrets and how to build all these ancient cathedrals and castles and everything else they built.
Exactly. And much like the tools, the plumb, the level, and the square, and the letter G, we've also adopted those things in an allegorical sense. So the modern day secrecy, which isn't very much, by the way, it's sort of an homage to those days when they needed to keep those secrets.
We've talked about now what Freemasonry is, what we do. How does someone get involved with Freemasonry? If you want to join a lodge, how would you go about doing that?
So the Scottish Rite has, in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, has done a real good job of that. There's a website, beafreemason.org, and you can go in there and it will connect you to the jurisdiction that you're in. So if you're from Connecticut, it'll connect you to Connecticut or Pennsylvania. Also, you could go in Pennsylvania, you go to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. It's pagrandlodge.org. And in there's how do I join? There's a link. Go look at it. Check out the link. And, even if you don't know any Masons, they will connect you to a lodge. And, of course, that lodge will then want to vet you out and make sure that you are of the quality to be a Mason. And, you need to be a good upstanding citizen. You need to believe in one God, and, all that kind of stuff. But, that's how you do it. These days you have the internet, so use it. Just search how do I become a Freemason, and you'll get a whole bunch of links and just follow on.
Right. Yeah, like you said about vetting people. One thing you said to me once, and I don't know if you came up with this or you stole it from somebody, but you said we take good men and make them better. We don't take bad men and make them good.
Yeah, that was a flagrant theft. No, that's a fact. We if you have a felony record, we're not interested in you.
Right.
If you haven't been caught doing something bad, if we know via your reputation or some other way that you maybe mistreat your family or that you are do bad business dealings or those kind of things, we're not interested in you. We don't want you in the fraternity. We want good, upstanding men who can be good examples to other men and who can contribute to the fraternity. So if you have those kind of problems, you need to look for another group.
Why would someone want to join the Masons? I mean, we've talked all about what it is, what we do and all of that, and the benefits of it. But why would a man want to join the Masons instead of saying join the Rotary Club or a Kiwanis Club or something like that? What's so special about Freemasonry?
Well, I'm not a member of those other clubs, but what I can say about Freemasonry is that it gives you a special bond with the brothers in your lodge and the brothers in the fraternity in general that I don't think you're going to get from just any organization. Freemasonry is very old, it's very successful, and it has been for a very long time. And there's a reason for that. It resonates with people, and it's definitely offering something that people like or that men like. For me, it's been the ability to be connected with good men that I know are upstanding citizens and good charitable-minded people who I can be friends with and I can trust. I mean, in my lodge, I would hand a wallet full of money to any of those guys. And when I get it back, who knows when later, all that money's still going to be there. These guys are honest and I can trust them. It's a great way to make friends. And these days it's a little tough because everything's online and you're not getting much exposure to people. The fraternity offers something that's, let's face it, to some extent from a time gone by, but it's something really valuable and it really does resonate with men,
And I think that's something a lot of men are missing in 2021, 2022. There isn't that fraternal bond between men that was in the past. And I think, I talk a lot about on my blog, my Twitter, my other things about masculinity. I'm very pro masculinity, that there's kind of this diminishing of the importance of male fraternal brotherhood, intimacy, friendship. And I think you see that in the way things have come in society, and where like a lot of things I work with is with porn addiction, sex addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, different things like that, is because men need these relationships. They need to build each other up and have that accountability and that support and that friendship and that brotherhood. You mentioned earlier a lot of Freemasonry grew during the 2 world wars because guys came home from there and were looking for that same brotherhood, that same bond that they had there and didn't have that elsewhere. And even years before that, people had it at their workplaces, they had it within their local communities. People were a lot closer together and build those fraternal friendships and bonds. in the 21st century and with technology, and we're more connected than ever, but we're more disconnected than ever too. We don't have those bonds. And I think Freemasonry provides that to men.
Yeah, I would agree. And you mentioned work a little bit. Most of us have work friends that we hang out with, but we wouldn't necessarily hang out with them if we weren't working with them.
Right.
You know what I mean? The really cool thing about Freemasonry is that you volunteer to be there, and so did everybody else. So it's not like you have this work hanging over you that is the reason why you communicate with each other. That you're there because you want to be there, and that's a huge differentiator. The other thing I should mention, I think is obvious by now, is that Freemasonry is a men's organization. There are times, and I hope if there's any women listening, they understand that sometimes the guys just need to be the guys. And, having women in the mix sometimes inhibits some of the conversations that might happen. Not that they're bad conversations, but maybe they're conversations that the guys wouldn't want to have in front of a lady, for example. And I think it's a good thing for men to have that. And you know what? If the ladies want to have an equivalent organization, they're very welcome to do that. And speaking for a lot of men that I know, they'll be happy to to not be there. Just making it clear that it is a men's club, and there's really good reason for that.
Yeah, and there are women's groups. I mean, there's the Order of the Eastern Star, and there are pendant bodies of that are designed for wives and daughters and families of Masons as well. But yeah, I do think that is so important for them to be places for men. And men only. And that's not sexist, that's not misogynistic. It's just a place for men can come together and can build each other up, for men to have some vulnerability too, and be able to, hey, I'm struggling with this, can you help me with this? Where you may not want to go to your group of neighbors and friends with everybody's wives and kids and everything there. A lot of men, they need that place to have that open and that vulnerability. Yeah, and we can do that. We can support each other and be there for each other.
Right. Now, that's not to say that we don't do functions with the ladies and with our families, the children and everything. In fact, our lodge does several functions with the whole family, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Right.
It's great having the kids running around and having the ladies involved and that kind of thing. It's just that when we get down to doing the Masonic business, that's just the men.
So, Rob, this has been a great conversation. I think our listeners have learned a ton about Freemasonry and what it is and what it isn't. I want to kind of give you the floor here before we close up. Is there any message that you have to our listeners about Freemasonry and what they can do and how they can learn more about it? Where, if they want to join a lodge, where they can find information how to do that, and if they're curious about it, where can they go to find more information about that?
Yeah, I would say that if you have a mind to, if you're a charitable kind of person, if you would like to expand your circle of friends, if you would like to expand your connections, although you shouldn't do it for mercenary reasons, but you would make a lot of good connections. If you want to, get some education that's outside of what you might normally see and hear and do, I would highly recommend you take a look at Freemasonry. It could fill a position in your life that you might not even realize you're missing. That fraternity, that bond between you and your male friends. It's pretty easy to figure out how to do it. Just, use your Google search, look for, beafreemason.org and look for pagrandlodge.org or wherever. Just search for, how do I become a Freemason? And you'll get lots of options. You may also find some really interesting conspiracy theories too. I would ask you to take those with a grain of salt, but the fact is they exist, and just take them for what they are and do the exploration yourself.
Yeah, and if you have questions, you can always come to someone who is a Mason, and they'll be glad to answer any of those questions that you might have.
Yeah, to the best they can. I mean, some of them are just comical and funny, but some of them, appear to be quite serious. And what you'll learn, especially if it's a friend of yours who you didn't even know was a Mason, if you know and respect that man, if you go talk to him and he tells you, there's really no truth to that, you kind of have to believe him because you knew and respected him before you knew he was a Mason.
Right. Well, Rob, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate you doing this and teaching us about Freemasonry. Really, really appreciate you having on your show.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
This has been an episode of the Into the Wilderness podcast. This is Timothy Regal. Thank you for listening. For additional content and to learn more about Into the Wilderness, visit www.intothewildernessblog.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and all other social media at Timothy Regal. TimothyReigle. If you're like me and many other men, you've struggled with porn. I was addicted for over 15 years and thought I would never break free. But through accountability, hard work, and never giving up, I found freedom from porn and sex addiction. If you're fighting the same battle, know there is hope. You can defeat this, but you cannot do it alone. That's why I offer one-on-one coaching to walk beside you in your battle. I'll provide personal guidance, support, and encouragement, and most importantly, accountability to keep you on track and help you reach your goals. So if you're ready to finally quit porn for good, if you're ready to put in the hard work, and if you're ready to finally take control of your life back, click on the link in the show notes to go to www.intothewildernessblog.com or DM me on Twitter or other social media to get started in your path to freedom today.